Hello and welcome to a new video. Today we'll be doing something a little bit different. I thought it would be fun if we just kind of made a dress together and had a little chat about the witch hunt in Salem. I just thought it would be a nice little chill kind of thing. I have this sewing project that I've been wanting to make for a very long time. I would like to recreate this dress that I've seen a ton on Pinterest. So for the project I have this fabric that I think is going to be very nice, and I also have this corset pattern that I got free online, and I'll see if I can put a link in the description if anyone wants to have the same pattern. And then as we're sewing, I'll just go through the witch trials that happened in Salem in 1692 that ended with 25 people killed. Okay, so let's start this project. The first thing we need to do is cut out some pattern pieces. And this room is very small. And even though I have managed to cut out fabric off the floor in a caravan, I actually think there is not enough room here. So let's head off to the art studio. So here I'm just laying out the pattern pieces on the fabric. Also, I know that my fabric is very wrinkly here, but don't worry, I'm going to iron it before I actually start sewing. I've also added 1 centimeter of seam allowance to all of my pattern pieces, and I also want to cut off the pieces at the waist, which is why I'm not cutting out the entire pattern. I'm also cutting out a rectangle that's 3 times the width of my waist that I'm gonna use for the pleated skirt. Okay, so as you probably remember, the fabric I cut out was very wrinkly. So before we start sewing, we just need to iron everything. So as I'm kind of just ironing all these pieces, I was thinking we could talk a little bit about the Salem witch hunt. So before jumping right into like the trials and stuff, let's just go over a little bit of backstory about what happened there. There were 2 Salems at this time. One known as Salem Town, which was located on Massachusetts Bay. So this was sort of a port community, and they had a big commerce industry going on there. This is also the town that would later become Salem, like the modern town of Salem. And then roughly 16 kilometers inland from this town, there was another town or village called Salem Village where about 500 people lived. This village mostly had poor farmers, and there was a huge social divide going on here between 2 rivaling families. The Porters were one of them, and they had connection to like the wealthy merchants from Salem Town, and the Putnams, who were kind of like the spokespeople for the more like the poorer farmers and stuff. So there was a lot of fighting between these 2 families over property, stuff like that. But there was already kind of like tensions brewing in Salem before the witch trials happened. So in 1986, the Putnams advocated for a new church to be created in Salem Village because the villagers had to walk or travel all the way to Salem Town every time they like wanted to go to a sermon or whatever Christian people do. And when this was happening, they got a new town pastor called Samuel Paris, a merchant from Boston. So this guy also like further polarized the whole society in this village, as some people had opinions about him not actually being like a fully ordained pastor. His studies at Harvard were interrupted before he could graduate, and also he was preaching this new Puritan kind of theology, which further divided the village to like pro and anti-Paris members. So when he moved to the village, he brought with him his wife, their 3 children, a niece, and also 2 slaves. So the witch trials then started in 1692, when Paris's daughter Betty and her cousin Abigail Williams started having some sort of fits. So these girls were very young when this started happening. Betty was only 9 and Abigail was 11. So these fits consisted of the girls screaming, throwing things around, crawling around under furniture, and contorting themselves into like weird positions. They also claimed that they felt like someone was pricking them all over the body with needles. So these fits would kind of come and go. And at one point there was a visiting Reverend who was doing a sermon in town, and he just kept being interrupted by these girls just having outbursts. So a doctor then of course had a look at the girls, and he could find nothing wrong. So it was concluded it must be witchcraft. That was kind of like how it went down at this time. If you had like an ailment and they couldn't find anything like physically wrong with you, they pretty much just blamed it on witchcraft. So the first person to be accused of witchcraft was one of the slaves that Paris brought with him, and her name was Tituba. She was an easy target just because of her, darker skin tone. She was seen as like an outcast in society because of this, and just her social standing made her easy to target. This was pretty much like the typical victim during the witch hunts. It was often like poor women in society with like bad reputations, and it's never explained what this bad reputation is. So she was put on the stand, and even though she initially denied all of these accusations, she later confessed to making a pact with the devil after she had been interrogated and berated for days. So then she started to accuse other people. This was also something that was very common during the witch trials, where the accused would kind of almost be forced to name other victims, and if they named other victims, there was also this hope that they would have a lesser punishment, or maybe not even be punished at all. So she then claimed that she made a pact with the devil, and she signed her name in the devil's book. And she's claimed that she also saw the names of Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne in this book. So both of these 2 women were poor and was known as having like a bad reputation. So all of these women were then sent to prison, and also because family members of witches were thought to be witches too, Sarah Good's 4-year-old daughter Dorothy was also sent to prison. Dorothy was questioned by the magistrates, and everything she said would be used against her mother in trial. Pretty fucked up if you ask me. Also, this prison that they were sent to was just like a horrible, horrible place to be. It was just kind of like a really shitty barn or something. So in the winter it got just freezing cold in there, and during the summer I think it was like nicknamed the hot box or something like that, just because of the extreme high temperatures they got in there. So in March of 1692, more and more people started to become accused of witchcraft. One of them was accused after she showed skepticism she was skeptic of the girls' accusations, and that in turn led to people being suspicious of her, and she was accused of witchcraft. So this woman and another woman that was accused at roughly around the same time were pretty much just kind of like upstanding citizen, active members of the Church of Salem Village and Salem Town respectively, which caused a bit of a stir in the community, because if these upstanding Christian women can be witches, that means that anyone could. So this then led to a mass arrest where several people related to the already accused women were arrested and sent to prison. So then these people, like I said before, thinking it would lessen their punishment, started to accuse even more people, that led to even more arrests. So the main reason people were being accused, or like the main testimony that people were using against these people, were that people claimed to have seen their so-called specters. A specter was like a projection of someone, like a ghost or something like that. And it was believed that when the witch made a pact with the devil could use this person's likeness as a specter. So more and more people in Salem started to claim that they had seen other people's specters. One guy said that he one time woke up in the middle of the night, not being able to breathe, and he saw the specter of a certain woman in town sitting on his chest. So all throughout April and May, these accusations and arrests continued. So these were people of so-called good morals and members of the church, and on April 30th, even Reverend George Burrows was arrested. Many people started to evade arrests and warrants were sent out. When the court convened at the end of May, the total number of people in custody was 62. I also just want to mention that the prisoners had to pay rent for being in prison. If they wanted some new straw for a bed, they had to pay. If they wanted like water or bread, they also had to pay for that. So this meant it was actually quite lucrative to keep people in prison. Just saying. Okay, so that's all the pieces ironed out. So what we're gonna do now is just pin everything together. So these are just the patterns for the bodice, and I'm making 2 layers. So there's gonna be an outer layer and a lining, and I'm just using the same fabric for both. Right, so here is what we got so far. I kind of just pinned the top to my tank top. Also, I got my roommate to pin the back of the dress to me, so thank you, Sarah. I have to say, I'm quite pleased with how it turned out. The only thing is that I'm not sure if I need to add some extra room to the back here, seeing as it's kind of going out a little bit. So what we need to do now is... The question now is, do I add an extra panel in the back to make sure it fits? Right, so we got our outer one, and then we got the lining. These are pretty much exactly the same, so it doesn't really matter which one is the lining and which one is the inside one up until now, because so this is the point where we're putting in the boning. So what we need to do now is make some boning cases, which is pretty much just like a little strip of fabric that is attached to the bodice that then this thing can go inside. Right, so we have some leftover fabric here that I thought we could just cut out strips from and use that as boning casing. Alright, man, there's a storm out today. I don't know if you can hear it, but it's just like a fucking hailstorm outside. Okay, so what we gotta do now is just pin all these strips onto this. So I suppose we can go back to chatting a little bit about the whole Salem thing again, because we got some time. Where we left it off is that everyone was going to prison, everyone was accusing everyone, and in May there was an official court opened in Salem to deal with all of these witch accusations, and this was led by Governor William Phipps? I don't know how to pronounce his name actually. Phipps. Phipps. So the first execution that happened in Salem was Bridget Bishop. So Bridget was accused of witchcraft for not living a Puritan lifestyle. Apparently she wore black clothes, which was a huge no-no within like the Puritan religious laws. This, along with her immoral lifestyle, whatever that means, led to her conviction of witchcraft, and she was hanged on June 10th, 1692. I also just want to point out that there are quite a few differences between the big European witch hunt and the Salem witch trials. In the European witch hunts, the people that was convicted of witchcraft were most often burnt, whereas in Salem and most of the other American colonies, witches were most often hanged. Anyway, so these trials just pretty much continue, and June 30th, I think there was 5 women again who were accused and then charged of witchcraft, and they were also hanged in July 19th. And among these women were Sarah Good, who was actually one of the first women who was ever accused. So they've been in prison for a few months at this point. So more people were tried and convicted of witchcraft, and on August 19th there was another one of these mass executions. So among these people was the Reverend I mentioned earlier, Reverend George Burrows, and as he was standing there, like with the noose around his neck, he started to recite the Lord's Prayer. It was thought that witches were incapable of doing this. So when he started doing this, the spectators just kind of freaked out, you know, because he wasn't supposed to be able to do this. So that caused like quite a bit of commotion and emotions. You know, they were starting to wonder like, fuck, maybe we shouldn't execute him. But then the people who accused him from the start said that they could see a black shape standing next to him, and this was the devil who was like feeding the lines into his ear and like telling him what to say. So he was hanged. So this continues on, and 8 more people are executed in September. There was this one guy, Giles Cory, whose wife was accused of witchcraft, and he believed she was guilty up until the point that he became accused of witchcraft as well. So this guy refused to plead neither guilty or not guilty. And by law at that time, you weren't allowed to have a trial for someone who wouldn't plead. So as a way to get him to confess, they did what was known as pressing. So pressing was a type of torture where they stripped the accused of all their clothes, put them on the ground, and then covered them with a bunch of heavy boards. Then on top of the boards, they put a bunch of heavy rocks and boulders. So that happened to Giles Cory, and this went on for 2 days, and every time they tried to get him to confess, he just said more weight until he eventually died from the injuries caused by this. 3 days later, his wife Martha was hanged. So on October 29th, 1692, the witch trials came to an end when the governor, William Phips, dissolved this court. Actually, his wife ended up becoming accused of witchcraft, and that's pretty much when he decided that's like, okay, this is going too far. So this court was dissolved, and instead they created a new type of court that dealt with the trials differently. So the old court had relied heavily on what was known as spectral evidence, meaning that most of the evidence was just things that people have thought that they'd seen, whereas this new court was more fact-based. So these new trials continued on, and at the end of May 1693, Phips had pardoned and released all of those that were still remaining in prison. Yeah, so I suppose that's a little bit about the witch hunt. There's so many theories about how this could have happened, why this happened, why these girls started to have these fits and stuff. But right now, we have gotten all of the casings pinned in, so now we need to head back to the sewing machine and do some sewing. Good morning. So it's the next day, and I wanted to show what I got done yesterday. These are the 2 bodice pieces. So this is the lining, and then this is the one that's going to be on the outer layer. This is the inside of the lining, and you can see I added these channels. You can see them here on every seam. I added a channel for this boning to go into. This is quite thick. I've never used this type before, so we shall see how that goes. But before we can put the boning in, I will attach the outside layer to the inside layer, and I will do this by pinning these 2 right together like so. And then I will just sew around the up part and then leave the bottom open so I can put in the boning and also turn it right side out. So that is what we will be doing right now. that the bodice is done, it is time to move on to the skirt. So I just want to have like a regular pleated skirt. So now we need to iron in some pleats. So as we're ironing this, I was thinking we can talk a little bit more about why the Salem witch trials happened. So there's like several different reasons why the Salem witch trials happened. So with witch hunts in general, it was very often that they took place during very difficult times. So the European witch hunts reached its culmination in like the 16th and 17th century. And that was also the same time that Europe underwent like a lot of poverty and starvation. So just kind of those difficult times were often happened at the same time as there was an increase in witch hunts. So as I said, Salem was divided into two different places. You had Salem town, and then you also had Salem Village. And Salem Village consisted mostly of, poor farmers and stuff. It was very small, and it was Salem Village where the witch trials actually started as well. Also, during this time, both America and Europe underwent very cold temperatures, the coldest period being between 1680 and 1730. So this led to food shortages and economic hardships and bad harvest, which might have caused like a need to find some scapegoat for all of this. One of the most common things that witches were accused of doing was causing hailstorms and bad weather to ruin the crops and cattle for other farmers. All of this combined with the already rising tensions in Salem due to the rivalry between the two families and the newly instated pastor that, half the people didn't like, probably played a huge part in letting the witch trials happen. But how come these girls started having these fits in the first place? So there's a few theories out there. One of them is that the girls got infected by a fungus that can be found in rye and other grains, and rye being the most common grain that was grown in Massachusetts. The extended period of damp and cold weather could have led to an infestation of the grains. So the symptoms you get for being infected by this fungus is hallucinations, vertigo, feelings of crawling sensations on your skin, headaches, and seizures. This could explain the initial fits that the girls suffered from, and maybe some other people from Salem became ill with the same illness, enough for it to start off this chain reaction. But there's no actual proof of this, so the only thing we can do is speculate. There's also some other theories out there, such as the girl getting an inflammation of the brain after being infected by a bird or insects. Or, they just made it up. So I also want to put the Salem witch trials in a bit of context. As I've noticed, I see quite a few people that see the Great European Witch Hunt and the Salem witch trials as the same thing. And they were quite different. I don't think the Salem witch trials are a good representation of what happened during the witch hunt as a whole. So the witch hunt in Europe took place between 1450 and 1750, at its peak between 1560 and 1630. There's a lot of different estimates to how many people were actually executed and killed during the witch hunts, but roughly between 30 and 50,000 people seems to be the most accepted estimation. I have read some sources that cite that up to 90,000 people were killed. So the witch hunts in Europe, they did happen in a similar way to the Salem witch trials, in which they came in these kind of chain reactions where you would have a village and one person would be accused, and this would start off set in motion the whole thing where people started to accuse other people because because the authorities demanded that the accused would name other accused. Then, you know, the whole executions would go on, and then, you know, it would just kind of die out after a time, either because of people started to protest against the killings, or it just kind of like died down. And then, you know, it would just kind of go back to normal, if that makes sense. And this is how the witch hunt kind of looked like, just these chain reactions that spread through different villages all throughout Europe. And also during these witch trials, it was most often elderly, single or widowed women that were most often the target of being accused. And it was also people who were just sort of on the fringe of society, and people who were deemed to have, you know, a bad reputation, whatever that meant. It wasn't this huge thing where people started having fits and seizures, and Salem was way crazier than a normal witch hunt would have been. But yeah, I'm actually planning on doing a video just about the European witch hunt. If anyone would be interested in that, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that video. And I think that's pretty much what I have to say about the Salem witch hunts. It was just a very strange thing that happened in the way it happened, sort of. And the witch hunt as a whole, I just think was a fucking awful thing that happened, and I think it was way more politicized than it is made out to be in history books and such. But I will talk more about that in my witch hunt video that will come soon.
Next to him, right? Yeah. I mean, he just called my son a piece of him. Alright, so what happens when you rage? So, well, we're just going to. So, I mean, wait, he's basically seeing you get number one. And I look at that. Alright, what did I get? I got a 10 plus, 11.
So this is where we are with the dress right now. It's pretty much finished. I just need to add a hook and eye in the back, and then I need to hem the skirt. I have to say I'm very happy with it so far, and I suppose that's it for now.